through a major surge, and this surge is something that is much bigger than what we have ever seen before. We are seeing a lot of patients with COVID who are extremely sick, and they're getting sick very quickly and very rapidly. These are young, otherwise healthy patients. To give you an example, we have several patients in their 20s who never had any medical problems and have never seen a doctor, are now in the intensive care unit on ventilator, being paralyzed, and we are still struggling to keep their oxygen levels up. So this is significant. We are seeing it every day, and we are seeing young people dying. One thing I will tell you is most patients that we are seeing in the hospital have not had their vaccine, and none, I will tell you, in the intensive care unit have had their vaccine. So we just based on that fact, it's clear, it's obvious that the vaccines are working. People who have vaccines are not getting hospitalized, and they are, even if they're getting COVID, they are getting COVID at a much milder, the form of illness is much mild, and they are able to stay out of the hospital and stay at home. Get vaccinated. That's just short two words. Vaccines work. Vaccines will prevent you from getting hospitalized. Do it for yourself, do it for your family, do it for your loved ones. You own it to them. Please get vaccinated.
Good night, Cayman Islands. I'm Kevin Waltler, and I'll be hosting tonight's CMR COVID Spotlight. Sandra is in the background, and she'll pop on here and there as you start to ask your questions. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and so we do have an expert, Dr. Klotman, on. He is the president and CEO of Baylor College of Medicine, and we're going to speak to him in just a little bit. But right before we get into that, I just want to take a moment to ask you to please share this link, either if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, with everyone you know. WhatsApp them as well. Let them know that we are live now, so we don't want people to miss out on the valuable information that will be shared on the show. And again, if you have any questions, you'll be able to ask them, whether you type it on Facebook or YouTube, or of course, you could actually call in. We'll be showing you a link or sharing a link with you that you could tap on. And if you have a question directly for Dr. Klotman, you'll be able to ask it directly. So as people are starting to join, let's take a look at the current or the latest data for the Cayman Islands. We had 9 new cases reported today. 5 of them were unvaccinated individuals, and 4 of them were fully vaccinated or vaccinated. They didn't specify whether they're fully vaccinated or not, but 4 vaccinated cases. And so those 5 of them were community positives, and 4 of them were in travelers. Now, I will tell you that one of the cases that was reported actually added another individual in our hospital, and that happened to be a child. Yesterday, that child was admitted to the Cayman Islands Hospital, but we are told that that child is doing better today. So we all need to keep that child in our prayers to make sure that we wish the family the very best, and also that that child has a quick recovery. We do know that our children, especially those who are not yet eligible for the vaccine, is a lot more vulnerable because there's nothing to really offer that added protection. And so we really encourage everyone to get vaccinated who is eligible, and do our best to protect everyone, especially our children and our elderly folks. So the active cases are currently 132 active cases, and of those active cases, 62 of them have symptoms and 70 of them don't have any. And we remain at on 2 deaths linked to COVID-19. And for our vaccine, we continue to get more and more people vaccinated, but we're not there yet. And Dr. Klotman could probably tell us in a bit exactly where we need to be to be in a much better position. We have 78% of the population having at least one dose and 74% of the population completing the entire series. So, we'll go ahead and bring on Dr. Klotman. Dr. Klotman, welcome to the CMR COVID Spotlight and taking the time to be on tonight.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So, Dr. Klotman, please tell us a little bit about yourself. I know we could see your bio online and stuff, but it's sometimes better to come from the horse's mouth directly. So tell us about some of your accomplishments, who you are, and how did you get in the position you're in now?
Well, so I'm president and CEO of the Baylor College of Medicine, and I have a background as a medical researcher. I trained at Duke University. I was at the NIH as an intramural laboratory scientist in molecular virology, and eventually I became a chair of medicine in Mount Sinai in New York, and then took the job here. So we're the only private medical school in the Southwest United States. We're a large entity. We have about 12,500 employees, 3,500 physicians, 8 affiliated hospitals. We train around 700 physicians in total, 186 a year. So we contribute a lot. We're a huge research enterprise, the largest in the Southwest, with over $650 million in research expenditures. Our faculty members are prominent. You may have seen Peter Hotez. He's developed a vaccine that's currently being licensed in India and developed in India. Our vaccine treatment unit has been involved with testing flu vaccine every year and has been involved with both the testing and follow-up of COVID-19. Our faculty have been PIs of the Moderna trial, of the Remdesivir trial. We've done the testing for our city and county. We started a wastewater program. So we've been very much engaged in the COVID epidemic in Texas, in particular in our Houston community.
Well, definitely, you've been involved in a whole lot. So, Dr. Klotman, one of the things that some may be asking is, how in the world did we get where we got to? I mean, how did this pandemic happen?
Well, so this is the worst pandemic since the Spanish flu in 1918. It really didn't originate in Spain. It was only that Spain was reporting on it. It was the middle of World War I. It actually probably started somewhere. It was probably propagated in the United States first. But we've had pandemics before. We've had SARS, MERS, HIV. As we encroach upon the animal kingdom, as a man expands its reach, we have a lot of opportunities to interface with other animal species. And whether, there's a lot of controversy around COVID-19, but most of these coronaviruses live in horseshoe bats. As people who live around horseshoe bat caves, about 5 or 6% of them are positive and have antibodies to those viruses, even though it doesn't propagate in man. We're constantly being exposed to these kinds of viruses because we live very close by. And whether it's a direct infection from an animal host, like in swine, the swine flu went directly from pigs to humans, or if there's intermediate species, like with SARS that was intermediate with cats, and MERS, which was intermediate host, was dromedaries, camels. And we don't know the exact intermediate host yet for COVID-19, but we suspect it might be in pangolins, because part of the virus is very much connected to related to the pangolin. And as you can see, if you look at the tremendous implication it's had, COVID-19 we've had more deaths in the United States from COVID-19 than AIDS or all of the wars combined. And so, I mean, it has really been dramatic, and it's because we had a novel virus, a completely new virus that humans hadn't been exposed to, and in a susceptible population, and especially with respiratory transmission, it's been very easy to spread throughout the world. And it's been, it's had devastating effects. There are millions of people who've died all over the world from this. So we weren't very well prepared. I think one of the things that we showed that in particular in the United States, but all over Europe, our public health infrastructure wasn't really prepared to deal with a pandemic like this. And it's been very difficult for the West to manage this. Some countries have done better than others, but the United States has been, frankly, it's been one of the worst in managing this pandemic.
Yeah, I popped up a slide that you shared with me when we were talking, and I just was looking it over, and I know you kind of touched on it where, you know, a lot of deaths compared to, you know, looking at 9/11 terrorist attacks straight up through the various world wars, and again, the 1918 flu. It's pretty significant, isn't it?
It's been the worst, event really for our country and for mankind so far. I mean, it should get everyone excited about trying to prepare for the next one, because this is not going to be the last pandemic we have. I mean, we've been having these, whether it's HIV, H1N1, SARS, swine flu, SARS, MERS. We keep having this. There's a lot of infectious diseases that are constantly entering, and so the question is, how do we prepare our infrastructure to manage it better than what we've done so far?
You know, one of the things, one of the shows I watched kind of before the pandemic started to actually come to America. I don't think we even had a case at that time, but you know, there was a lot of talks about it. There was a show that came out on Netflix, I believe. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was called Pandemic, and it was kind of
Yes.
focused on influenza, on the flu. And I remember they were saying, you know, oh, we're going to be prepared, the things kind of being prepared for the next pandemic. And then,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of the government workers and different spokespeople were saying, hey, we're going to be just okay. It's going to
Right.
come and go. And we're
Well,
still
it's
in it.
funny. More than the film, Johns Hopkins University sponsored a tabletop exercise about 5 years before this pandemic, and they said, okay, what will be the next pandemic? Let's figure out so we can begin to prepare. Because Johns Hopkins has a really good public health school, and it was sponsored by the public health school. And so they figure, well, what's the most likely thing? So it's probably going to emerge out of Asia. That's where most of these respiratory viruses emerge. Probably going to be South Asia. It's probably going to be a coronavirus. We don't know which one. And they did a whole projection of what would happen, and pretty much modeled what has happened and made a recommendation. I think the Obama administration started a pandemic group, to try and start formulating policy around what we would do. That was sort of ignored, and we have never really invested in the public health infrastructure that we need. And you could see the early cases. Had we been able to contain this, it would have been great, but we didn't really have good contact tracing available. We weren't isolating people. And in fact, it was sort of already in New York and Seattle well before public health measures could really, contain it. And as a result, we ended up with policies like shutting down everything. That there's very little, it's a blunt instrument when you can't contact trace and isolate people. All you can do is close businesses so people can't see each other. It's really, look what they did in China. I mean, they could do that in China because that's the way they are, but they locked everybody up for a month. That's not something that would ever happen in our culture, but it was an effective way to keep people apart so that the pandemic, or at least their local epidemic, would get lesser.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I know that you have to balance, okay, what you need to do for public health to protect public health, but you also have to kind of just balance that with reality and okay, what's that right balance? And so that's where I guess the politicians have to decide what that right balance is. And there's some very different views on how to handle it. We know what we need to do to stop the virus from spreading, but that also doesn't work with human behavior.
Well, it's funny. The public health was really brought into being to manage this, and so you don't have the right. If you have tuberculosis, you don't have the right to walk around free. We already said, you can be isolated. You can be taken. The authorities can grab you and isolate you, and somehow with COVID, it became a political issue of, I have the right to to do whatever I want to do, to not wear a mask, to be vaccinated or not to get vaccinated. Well, that's not good public health. And there are some things that you have to do. So, for example, you know, you have the right to strap on a stick of dynamite on your chest and walk around your house, but you don't have the right to walk into a group of people and detonate it. Well, you have the right to not be vaccinated, sure, and stay at home. But the minute you start walking around and you're infected, you're actually a little bit of a bioterrorist. You are out there infecting other people who don't want to be infected by you. So I do think we have not implemented the kinds of programs that we could. Now with the vaccine, I do think mandates are really important. I would like to see even more mandates. I think a federal mandate that required vaccinations when you fly would go a long way in the United States. Most countries have done this already. You can't fly to Europe without being vaccinated, having proof of vaccination, and showing a negative test now. Well, we should be doing that in the United States. If the states don't do it, then I think the federal government should actually step in and make mandates that will increase the population that's vaccinated, because we have to vaccinate our way out of this, or we're just going to see a lot more deaths. I mean, people who are not vaccinated are going to get infected, and a percentage of those are going to have a real problem, and some of them are going to die.
Yeah, I know they do have some for at least international flights coming into the U.S. I believe that's already in place. But interesting if it expands a bit more to all travelers. If you want to get on an airplane, you got to get vaccinated and other things like that. It would be interesting to see if that will be possible with all of the legal challenges that ends up happening. But yeah, I mean, this is where you have to really go to public health experts and get that advice.
Yeah, I mean, if you did a federal mandate like that, you may not get reelected, but you probably bring an end to the pandemic. So it's like, what's more important? We have mask mandates. You have to wear a mask on an airplane. Even though states don't necessarily, some states have said you can't have a mandate, but because it's federally regulated, you have to wear a mask on an airplane or you can't get on an airplane. So you could federal employees now have been mandated to be vaccinated. You could do the same, unless, of course, with medical and religious exemptions, but you could easily mandate that you can't fly without being vaccinated, especially since going from state to state, you have the opportunity to spread virus around the country to communities that don't want to be infected.
Well, I'm going to ask for Sandra to come up because I know we got some questions that I see starting to roll on in. So Sandra, have you been looking them over? What do we have?
Thank you so much, Kevin, and good evening to Dr. Klotman. We've got El Rey. It's a very lengthy, I'm trying to decipher what the question is here, as it's quite lengthy, but it says, remind me, how do mRNA vaccines work? So let's start there.
All right. So the mRNA is a nucleic acid that you start off with DNA, it gets transcribed to mRNA and then translated to a protein. And so if you give mRNA alone, it's rapidly degraded, so you can't just inject mRNA. So mRNA the vaccines are used, they have a lipid kind of droplet that the RNA sits in, so it's able to get into cells. And it's like a read-only file. So if the RNA ends up in your cell machinery actually produces the protein. And in this case, it's the spike protein of the coronavirus. That spike protein is released, and what happens, because it's a foreign protein, your body recognizes it and develops an immune response. It's a lot more efficient and quicker to make this than actually traditional vaccines, which you try to manufacture the protein and inject the protein into people. So if you look at, and a lot of the current vaccines that are being used by other countries are just the protein. So you could manufacture the spike, actually the proteins that make up the spike, give it to people, stimulate them. But the trouble with that, and the reason that has problems, is in order to make the protein, you need a sort of a machinery to make it. And we often do that in eggs or in insect cells. And because of that, people have immune responses to some of the stuff that gets in from the production process. With the mRNA vaccines, you don't have that. The RNA goes into your cell. You make it. It's not made by insect cells. It's not made by, chicken eggs. It's made by you. And so there's no reaction to that. And so you're making this pure protein, and then you react to it. Doesn't get into your DNA. It doesn't affect your DNA at all. It's, as I say, it's a read-only file. It can't get into you, into your cells, and it makes the protein, and you respond to it. So it's kind of a breakthrough, but it's not new technology. This has been going on for decades. When I was in the NIH in 1990, we were working on a gene therapy strategies that included RNA and DNA constructs. The real advancement came with the combination of the RNA with the lipid vesicles that allow it to go in. The advantage of the RNA is it's like a typewriter. We have instruments that can assemble the sequence of the RNA. So you can come up with a new sequence, within days, and within 90 days, you can be constructing a whole new vaccine. So I think the one thing about this is that vaccine technology is going to change quite a bit, and you'll see a lot more of these RNA vaccines for other diseases as well. But people are going like, well, it's too new. Well, it's really not new. It's decades of experience doing this. It was just a combination of the ability of to combine that with better vesicles to deliver it, and then the fact that the government's all paid for it in advance, so it allowed the development to go more quickly.
I do have a question following up on the mRNA technology, because I know there is a lot of folks who are saying, I'm not getting vaccinated because there's so much social media posts about some individual who claimed that he invented the mRNA technology and says it shouldn't be used for COVID. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's so much misinformation on social media. It's like unbelievable. The RNA vaccine, the RNA technology has been around for 30 years. And there's not a person who invented it. There's a woman at BioNTech in Germany who used to be at Penn, who really focused her work on trying to create the vaccines that today. She left there, went to BioNTech in Germany. And there were 3 or 4 companies, including Moderna, that had been working on RNA technology for many, many years, mostly for cancer immunotherapy. That was sort of the hope, was that we'd be able to give these vaccines against certain types of cancer. And then coronavirus popped up. So it's very easy to make a vaccine because you just sort of create the RNA sequence. Machines make it, but the lipid vesicles really were the key. And they're remarkably safe. I mean, we've vaccinated hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of millions. And there's very few problems relative to other vaccines. There's been a little bit of myocarditis, pericarditis that's not much worse than the coronavirus-induced myocarditis. The adenoviral vectors are different. The DNA vectors, like the AstraZeneca vaccine, is different. It's a viral vector that has a DNA element in it that has to go to RNA and then to proteins. They've had they've had some complications with clotting that's a little bit like heparin-induced platelet aggregation. But again, it's very small numbers. There's been, Guillain-Barré used to be a real problem. Some people with flu vaccinations, we haven't really seen much of a signal with Guillain-Barré. So anybody who claims that these shouldn't be used, look at the numbers, hundreds of millions of people. If you look at the deaths, the vast majority of deaths are unvaccinated people. You ran the thing. ICUs are filled with unvaccinated people. Now, the vaccines aren't perfect. So when people go, well, geez, I got vaccinated and I got sick. Well, you get sick for a day or two is a lot different from being on a ventilator and dying in an ICU. So the vaccines have been incredibly effective. And if you look in the states where there's high vaccination rate, there's very low death rate. If you look at the states, there's low vaccination rate, very high death rate. So, I mean, there's so much data to support it. I can't believe that people turn to a single person's post on social media and believe anything. I mean, think about the fiction around it causes infertility. I know normal human, smart people who've said, well, my daughter's not getting vaccinated because it causes infertility. That was a blog that was started by a European soccer person who put this thing on a Pfizer expose. It causes infertility, and the idea was Pfizer was trying, or these drug companies were trying to limit the population of the world. I mean, it was crazy, and yet that got a huge amount of play, and people will say, "Oh, it causes infertility." Even the British Fertility Society came out and said, "Doesn't do it. There's no reason why it would. There's no biologic evidence that would." And the worst thing is, pregnancy is pregnant women are at enhanced risk from complications with COVID, and there have been deaths from pregnant women. There have been deaths of their babies. The key, get vaccinated. If you're pregnant, it's even more important because your baby's protected from passive immunity. It gets your antibodies and protects them. So these are the kinds of, one of the downsides of social media. It's been great for connecting people, but it's been terrible for misinformation.
On that note too, I know a lot of people in the Cayman Islands, they're seeing these things on social media, and then from their own experience, they're saying that they know a lot of people having adverse reactions, and so they're saying the government's hiding data. I know it's the same conversation here in the States, where look at the various numbers, and so there's a lot of that going on. And so we do have a couple of cases where we're kind of keeping an eye on to kind of figure out if it was really linked to the vaccine or not. But people are for sure, they say that it's because of the vaccine. A little island like the Cayman Islands that has about 71,000, where there's a number of people saying it. How realistic is that?
Well, so, unfortunately, when you vaccinate millions of people, humans die, from things unrelated to the vaccine or from COVID. And so when you're vaccinating people, like, I hate to say my age, 65, 70, 75, they may have a heart attack the next day. And so what the CDC does when it was emergency use authorization, there were 4,000 deaths, after millions and tens, almost 100 million vaccines, there were 4,000 deaths. Every single one of those was reviewed by a panel of experts. So, physicians who are able to understand what happened, look at the patient's medical history, look at the timing. Every single one of those was thought to be unrelated to the vaccine. In fact, there was no signal from mortality at all. But I knew people said, well, I knew somebody got vaccinated and then died 2 days later. Well, I know people who died yesterday, but that is unrelated to the vaccine. So you have to rely on the fact that, there's going to be background noise, and that's why we have panels of experts looking at it. We did pick up the signal around myocarditis. That was real. We did pick up the signal around the clotting abnormalities with AstraZeneca. That was real. But there's been right now, the mortality data between if you're vaccinated and unvaccinated, it's vastly different. I mean, you're so much more protected from a bad outcome if you're vaccinated. It's too bad because people are reaching conclusions based on an N of one, or I know one person, it's anecdotal. We do have medical experts. I would listen to a medical expert, more than I would listen to my neighbor who said they knew somebody who died yesterday. I mean, that's unfortunately the problem, is that somehow maybe it's our fault. Maybe the medical experts in the world, we're not doing a good job communicating. I accept that. But I mean, if I listen to expertise, I don't tell the guy when my air conditioner's not working, I don't tell him what's wrong. I listen to him. But,
Well, we're going to go back to our questions. Again, if everyone who watching would just share it on their social media page, invite their friends on WhatsApp, let people know that we are live right now. And this is an opportunity to ask Dr. Klotman, an expert in this field on COVID, some questions. Please send your questions in, tell your friends to watch. But Sandra, over to you, and let's see what we got going on in the chats.
Okay, fantastic. So we've got Denver making a few comments. And he says that, I think he's saying that he would encourage getting both vaccinations, both dosages, but he says it all depends on your body's immune system. How important does one's immune system play in the entire process, whether you're vaccinated or not?
So it's a good point. The thing about it is, if you look at individuals who get a vaccine, they all have varying levels of immune response to the vaccine. Some have very high levels of antibodies, some are middle, and some are kind of low. And we've followed this for years and years with flu vaccine. We know that there's a sort of a bell-shaped curve, of responses to your immune response. Most of the time, if you look at who gets infected after vaccination, they're at the very, very tail end of the response. So there are people who really don't respond well. And those are the people who early on you would even expect to get a booster. So people on immunosuppressants, people who have cancer or are taking steroids for whatever reason, they're going to have a blunted immune response. And so those people, we've always said, maybe they're the ones you measure antibodies and then you do a booster if they haven't got it. That said, it's not 100% predictive. So there are people like with flu, for example, who are very low responders, but don't get flu. And then there are people who have a little higher response and do get flu. So it's not a cutoff. We can't say, oh, this antibody level totally protects you. But most people get such high antibody levels that they're highly protective. One of the things that people forget is it's not just the antibodies that's circulating. You have these memory cells, memory T cells and memory B cells. The B cells make the immunoglobulins. The T cells fight the cells that are infected, and they're required to help make the antibodies. There's plenty of evidence that after vaccination or after infection, you have memory T and B cells. And one of the reasons why it's pretty interesting that if you're vaccinated, people may get it infected, breakthrough infections, about 10 or 15% will get breakthrough. It's gotten more and more with Pfizer because it's waning antibody levels. But they don't get really, really terribly ill. So they're not getting hospitalized, they're not dying. That's probably because you have a head start. If you've been vaccinated, even if your antibodies are dropping out, your body has the memory. It's a head start. So if you're infected, you're already boosted and you respond very quickly. So it helps control the infection, so you don't get really, really sick. I don't know if you've had this experience. I've had the experience of having a flu vaccination. Wasn't a perfect match that year, and I got the flu. But it was a 2-day illness. I had a fever and I didn't feel good for 2 days. If you're not vaccinated, I've also gotten the flu when I'm not vaccinated. It's a 10-day to 2-week illness, and they're in bad years. There are 50,000 people in the United States who die from the flu. But if you're vaccinated, even if you get have an infection, it's pretty mild. And that's been the case. If you look at the Israeli experience, they looked at the 7 million people that or 5 million people that have been vaccinated. They looked at who got hospitalized and who had a bad outcome and died. It was of all the people who've been vaccinated, it was only about 400 or 500 people in the entire country who'd been vaccinated and had a very serious outcome. And of those 400, they were almost all over the age of 75 or 80. 40% of them had an immune problem, a disease that was affected their immune responses. So the point is that if you get vaccinated, it is highly protective for you for serious illness and death. The other thing is it takes both vaccinations. So, when people get one and say, well, I'm pretty good, it's not pretty good. You need both vaccinations. And what we're finding out with the Pfizer vaccine, if you're over the age of 60 or if you're exposed to a lot of virus, you probably need a booster as well after about 6 or 8 months.
Okay, thank you. Denver, hopefully that's helpful. We have Paradise Thinkers who says that infecting the vaccinated whom are protected from the virus help us understand. So what's wrong with that statement?
So let me. I hope I can figure out what you're trying to ask. Vaccinations are not 100% protective. So they're very good, 80, 85%. They're very protective against serious disease and death, but they don't prevent. In 80% or 90% of the time, you are protected against an infection. But if you think about what happens when you get an injection, you develop an immune response, and that immune response is mostly in your bloodstream. That doesn't mean that you can't get an infection in your nose and have some replication of the virus. So a lot of the people who get infected, and you were just saying the latest data in Cayman Islands, half the people who they found were infected were asymptomatic. So they have some replication going on in their, in their nose or pharynx, but it's not affecting them because they have this immune response. They'll also get over the stuff in their nose and pharynx after 10 days. And then those people that are symptomatic, the symptoms are usually mild. It's true that in some rare individuals, they get very sick. And as I said, even in Israel, of the millions of people who've been vaccinated, there have been 400 deaths. There are people who will, even though they're vaccinated, don't get the greatest immune response and get sick and get serious stuff. But it's very, very small. I mean, the differences are huge. 97% of the admissions in our hospitals locally here are unvaccinated. And you were talking about the ICUs. You ran the little video before it. The ICUs, it's mostly unvaccinated people. Why would you want to take that risk? It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's really playing Russian roulette with a very serious virus. And we showed you the number of people who've died in this country. It's worse than any other thing we've experienced. Why would you even take the risk?
So you mentioned Israel a few times, and so I know there's a lot of news reports out there saying, well, Israel at first was, they were on it and things were going well, and all of a sudden now you're hearing, well, Israel's needing all these extra boosters, things aren't going so good. What went wrong is the question.
So that what went wrong is the same thing that went wrong with the United Kingdom. So they were doing well. They were actually, Israel was up to about 70% of their population vaccinated. UK was around 68, 69%. The UK declared on July 19th, Freedom Day. It was just, it's just stupid, freedom from the virus. Well, having 69% of your population vaccinated isn't anywhere near what you need. You need 85 or 90%. And so they relaxed all of their public health measures, got rid of masks, stopped having, any restrictions on social distancing. And they have continued to have a very high level of infections even now. Now, Israel did the same thing. They relaxed their social restrictions. They removed their mask orders, and they just didn't. They weren't very smart. So in contrast, Italy, right? Italy was the worst. In Padua, Italy was where it was all overrun. They were doing terribly. There was a lot of criticism of the prime minister because they hadn't really invoked social restrictions very much. They started the Green Pass, which is a passport. You can't travel. You can't enter restaurants. You can't do anything unless you show that you've been vaccinated. They insist on mask wearing indoors, social distancing, and they have been doing great. So where you treat it like it's a viral infection, vaccinate the most people, have vaccine passports. So if you're not vaccinated, you can't come into a crowd. You wear masks, if you in any kind of mixed group. They've done a very good job. UK is not. Israel was doing great. Not so much anymore.
Sandra, let's take a look. I see more comments are coming on in. Let's make sure we're getting them.
Absolutely. So we have Nona who says, how likely is it that COVID was present all along in the Cayman Islands bubble for the past 18 months, and yet no one has been admitted to the hospital or died from it? So essentially what we had, Dr. Klotman, is we thought that we were COVID-free for about 18 months. And then recently some cases started to pop up of community transmission. The first individual that popped up in one of the in North Side, it turns out that she was admitted to the hospital and they're testing people before they take them on any ward. But she wasn't admitted for anything related to COVID. She has other comorbidities and issues. She's like in her 70s. So of course, upon testing her, they then discovered that her son had it. The guy next door, who's the son's friend, also had it. And then that was about maybe a month ago. Since then, we've had, oh my gosh, I'm beginning to lose count here, of countless community cases, because now they've gone into all of the schools and they've started testing a tremendous amount of individuals in the schools. And a lot of the children actually have it as well. Mild symptoms. We had one child apparently that was hospitalized late yesterday. So the question that Nona is asking is it possible, or how likely is it that for the past 18 months, while we were kind of moving about relatively freely, not mask wearing and so on, because we thought we had no community transmission, and we were just addressing it with travelers and having them quarantine, how likely is it that we probably had community transmission and just didn't know it?
Well, I think it was probably pretty likely, and that's the way every country has been. So, this virus we almost certainly emerged from Asia, probably through a recombinant event, and then started spreading. If you look in the United States, we saw cases first in Seattle, very small number of cases. Then in New York, very small number of cases. We had some in Texas, very small number of cases. And we were having events, we figured there was not a lot of community transmission. Well, then all of a sudden it blew up. And this is what happens with any epidemic or pandemic. If you have a completely susceptible population, you're fine. And then as you reach a threshold, it begins to spike up. So initially it chugs along at a very low level until enough people are infected, and then it goes very high. So you just were lucky as an island community. You were sort of late to get it. My guess is it wasn't the entire 18 months, but you were probably COVID-free until some traveler or some Cayman Island person went somewhere and got infected and brought it back. Once that happens in New Zealand, it happened in Australia, island communities are protected until they're not. And then once you're infected, you get this dynamic and the curve starts slow and then goes up and peaks. That's the way it works for every single country and every single epidemic. It starts slow until you get to this logarithmic phase where it goes very, very quickly. And eventually then people are infected and it begins to plateau. You have the opportunity to avoid a real big peak if you can get enough people vaccinated. And you have the advantage as an island community also to really be rigorous about, if you can get, you're already doing actually really well, 78%, 75% of the community vaccinated. If you can get to 90% vaccinated and you have rigorous restrictions about who can come in, that they must be, have a negative test and be vaccinated, you can probably open up your, tourist industry again and be, go almost back to normal. But you got to get up to like 90% of your population vaccinated and make sure that you're not bringing in. Plus, there was of course, the dynamic that the Delta virus showed up in kind of July and August, and it's been a lot more infectious. And so the original virus was not nearly. It was like 1/3 as infectious. So you could have been chugging along with that until Delta arrived, and then Delta's much more infectious, and it's very difficult to control.
Thank you so much for that. So Rachel makes the point that she's kind of giving just a little bit of background how, we were doing a lot of PCR testing, people were coming in. And then, of course, we didn't have this local case that we were aware of until August. So that's why the local public health authorities are saying that we didn't have community transmission. She makes the point that England is trying for herd immunity. It's a dangerous, ruthless strategy, and people are getting infected more than any other European country. So do you know much about what's happening in the UK at the moment?
Yeah, so it's what I said. I mean, so the herd immunity, just letting everybody get infected and try to get to herd immunity is a terrible idea. Because it just says you're willing to tolerate as many deaths as it will require to get there. And the idea is you want to prevent that by getting everybody vaccinated so they don't die. So and there were even people advocating that in the United States, which was insane. Let's just let everybody get infected. That we'd have close to 1 million deaths rather than 700,000 deaths. So I think the UK made a terrible decision to declare victory, start this Freedom Day, July 19th, and they're paying the price. They have more cases, as you say, more cases than any other European country. And Italy is doing better than they. So I think it's just bad policy. At some point, it's just bad policy. I think your health department's done a good job. I think they've been on top of it better than most countries, better than the United States. But the United Kingdom is not doing a good job. I think they've had bad policies. They're dangerous policies, and I think they're suffering from it. And there are going to be a lot more deaths.
What else do we have, Sandra? I see some.
So we've got Anthony who says vaccinated people are not protected from contracting the virus. So we hear this a lot. as an argument for why bother getting vaccinated. Now, we know that a study came out, Dr. Klotman, just last week. I think it was published on Thursday. It hadn't been peer reviewed as yet, but it did show that although the levels of the vaccine might be the same in both an unvaccinated and a vaccinated person, apparently a vaccinated person is 60-something% less likely to pass that on and infect other people. So it seems that, I mean, obviously you can answer this, but the biggest protection is staying out of the hospital, staying alive, but it also gives you some degree of protection when it comes to passing on the virus as well. What are your thoughts when people say to you, well, vaccinated people are not protected from contracting the virus?
So I mean, that's just incorrect. That is just incorrect. I mean, if you look at the studies that were done, the randomized trials that were done, and our experience with millions of people, there was just a study in the Lancet, 3.5 million people. It's incredibly effective at protecting against infection and like tremendously against serious disease and death. That doesn't mean that you cannot contract the virus. Most people don't, but some do, because you don't get 100% protection. But early on, it's about 88% for Pfizer, 93% for Moderna. Moderna right now, there's no evidence that their protection is waning as much. With Pfizer, and this was a giant study published out of Kaiser Permanente in California, 3.5 million people. The protection began to wane. It went from 70% down to almost 45%, but 45% protected versus no protection. So that was some of the argument why, you know, the Pfizer vaccine requires a booster. Well, why would that be? Why are they different? The Moderna vaccine is threefold the dose. So it's 100 micrograms versus 30 micrograms of RNA. And there's a spread difference. It's 4 weeks for Moderna versus 3 weeks. And it turns out the booster effect is better the farther out you are from the first dose. So they had a better spread for the booster effect and a bigger dose. And so the Pfizer booster is the same thing, 30 micrograms after 6 or 8 months. But it is incredibly effective against protecting. It's not 100%, but you have 0% protection. 0% protection, you know, if you're not vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated and you're exposed to the Delta virus, you're going to get it. I mean, there's a number we call the R number, the infection number. If you walk into a room of 10 people, one infected person walks into a room of 10 people with the flu virus, you know, you'll infect one and a half, two people. With the original this original COVID-19 strain before Delta, it was 2 or 3 people. You walk into a room of 10 people, you'll infect 2 or 3. With the Delta, it's 6 or 7. So, you know, if there are 10 susceptible people and you're exposed to one infected person, you got a 7 out of 10 chance of being infected. If you're vaccinated, you know, you're probably not going to be infected. You could be exposed. You'll have to be exposed, you know, 8 out of 10 times, 8 times before you even have a chance of being infected. The differences are huge. Get vaccinated.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So Anthony, hopefully you've learned why that is misinformation. Gloria says 26,041 deaths and 2.4 million injuries following COVID shots in European Union's database, as Slovenia suspends J&J shot after death of a 20-year-old student. This is according to someone who she says named Brian Shilhavy, editor of Health Impact News.
So first of all, the AstraZeneca, well, that's J&J. There was several deaths with the AstraZeneca vaccine reported in Europe. It was in Norway and Germany, and it was in younger people. There were over 1 million vaccinations, and they had about 20 of these syndromes where they had clotting and low platelets. And it turns out that it's very similar to heparin-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. So there's this anticoagulant heparin binds to a particular platelet activating factor and induces platelet aggregation. And and that domain, that little binding site for heparin, turns out that the antibodies generated were right to that domain. And so in a rare individual, very rare, there could be this clotting abnormality because no one knew what it was. They didn't know it was an immune. They thought it was more like heparin induced. They anticoagulated these people because they had clots. Well, that's the absolute wrong thing to do until they figured out the mechanism. Now that we know the mechanism is an immune mechanism, and the treatment of choice is to actually immune suppress those people rather than anticoagulate them. There haven't been any deaths since then, and there have been very few complications since then related to either the adenovirus, the J&J vaccine, or the AstraZeneca vaccine. I don't know the 26,000. I don't know what they're talking about. That's just there's just not. It's not true. Now, one of the things about one of the things that's a problem is that we have incredibly good reporting now. We can online, people can report any complication they have. In the past, you had to have a phase 4 study where you would talk to a study coordinator and you'd say, I have a headache. Is that related to my vaccination? They might, do anything. Right now, you can report anything. And so there's a ton of things that are reported. But if you look at the randomized trials where you had placebo and vaccination, there was no difference in the side effects of placebo injection versus the vaccine injection, with the one exception that there was a little bit more local reaction with the mRNA vaccine. I don't even know what this is. Vitamin C.
Okay, so I brought up, I've just done a quick Google search on this guy that she's claiming, I guess, is supposed to be some sort of expert, Brian Shulhavy, editor of Health Impact.
Who he is.
Yeah, well, here's a healthfeedback.org website who has reviewed articles from this Health Impact News. And there's a number of claims that he's made about vitamin C supplementation does not prevent viral respiratory infections and so on. So he's got claims here. The coronavirus pandemic can be dramatically slowed or stopped with the immediate widespread use of high dosages of vitamin C, he claims. That's
ridiculous.
Yeah, it says the verdict here is unsupported. He claims that 4,250% increase in fetal deaths reported.
That's ridiculous. In fact, this is just insane. We shouldn't even be shown. There's a giant study looking at complication rates for pregnancy before and after vaccination. There's absolutely no difference. So this is just somebody making stuff up.
Right. But this website has done a good job of actually debunking. Yeah. So another claim he apparently made is that vitamin D is more effective than a flu vaccine. And he also made one that formerly healthy people are suffering serious harm or even dying from taking the flu shot. That's dating back to 2019. So he's been debunked even before COVID. So folks, this is why you want to ensure that you're getting your information from reliable sources. I've placed this link there in the chat area. And again, this Health Impact News is apparently some sort of wannabe publication. It looks like it's potentially out of the Netherlands. So I'm not quite sure why people go out of their way to receive misinformation.
Explain that to me. So, there's an interesting study. I was looking at misinformation.
Yes.
And if you get the same misinformation multiple times, it's more effective than getting the correct information once or twice. So, this is the problem, is people keep getting multiple things of, it causes this problem in pregnancy, or causes infertility, or causes this. And this just keeps circulating. They'll hear it 9 or 10 times. And then you hear me once. It's like, oh, I heard it 10 times and there's this guy. It's very hard to compete with the constant repeating of misinformation, which is a real problem.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the reasons why, of course, we are presenting this forum.
We want to bring on the experts, and not just one expert as you're always going to see. We're bringing on different people from all over.
Exactly.
To make sure that we're asking a lot of the same questions. We're We're bringing on epidemiologists, we're bringing on virologists, we're bringing on public health experts, we're bringing on those who are on the front line, like the nurses and the doctors who actually are treating patients, not reading it in a journal. We want to make sure that we are bringing on individuals who really know what they're talking about and to spread facts.
And here's an interesting term that is something I think we should all become familiar with. These pseudoscience publications, such as Health Impact News Network, is now being called misinformation super spreaders. So there you have it, kind of like what the good doctor was just saying. Rachel says, do fading antibodies 6 months after the jab tell the whole story? Are there other elements of the immune system that still kick in several months later after the vaccine if you're exposed to the virus? If you're exposed, okay.
She must be a scientist. That's exactly right. There are other elements of the immune system, and as I mentioned earlier, memory B and memory T cells, and they have been shown. There have been studies that looked at the T cells in lymph nodes and the B cells in germinal centers, and they are very highly active and very prepared to deal with a sort of a re-challenge of the virus, which is why I think that even though the ability to get mild infection wanes, but this ability to prevent you from getting very serious or hospitalized sustained, even with Pfizer, despite the waning immunoglobulin levels, because you have memory cells ready to go. So yeah, you might get a mild infection, but your body is already prepared to respond quickly. That's what memory cells do. You've had flu before, you're ready, you respond again. That's the whole point, is you have this whole memory system that is prepared very quickly to respond. It doesn't prevent you from getting infected, but prevents it from spreading. And so, yes, I think that's one of the unknowns. We're using this waning immunoglobulin levels to assume that we need. And then there has been an increase, as I pointed out with that Kaiser Permanente study. It looks like mild infections have gone from prevention of mild infections went from 83% down to about 45% over 6 months with Pfizer, which then you say, okay, well, if they're getting mildly infected, we probably do need a booster. But there are other parts of the immune system that are totally ready to deal with this. And I think that's why you have this consistent prevention of serious disease.
Okay, and Paradise Thinker says, what are your thoughts on Sweden's approach? They're reporting better results than what we predicted, especially due to their...
So it's interesting you bring that up, because Sweden decided what we will do is we'll just protect the vulnerable, we'll let everybody do whatever they want. The Prime Minister of Sweden, and actually the health director of Sweden, declared that a total failure. Prime Minister of Sweden is not running for re-election. And I think a lot of it has to do with their mismanagement. They did not do well. They had a lot of infection. And so the concept that somehow you can really isolate people from the population did not work out. And so I would say that a Swedish approach, which is really we'll let everybody behave like they're normally, there's no issue, and we'll just keep old people aside, did not work.
Dr. Klotman, we're running out of time, and I really want to get on a topic that is also something that is spreading all over. The ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, online, people are Googling and they're saying, oh, there's an area in India that eradicated COVID more or less by using these drugs. You hear other people in the United States and around the world saying they swear by it. Let's have a conversation on that.
Well, yeah, so in a brief period of time, so there hasn't been a lot of studies. Hydroxychloroquine has been studied and shown to be of no value. So there's no reason to do that. That's been proven. It was, again, I don't know why people make up solutions when we have one. We have a vaccine that works. Why would you make up something? Ivermectin, there is absolutely no biologic or pharmacologic reason why it would work. There's no evidence that it works. There's been no study that shows it works. CDC now has had several ivermectin poisoning. I have no idea why people jump to this, but yes, there are the same sort of misinformation, and some physicians have been propagating this, but there is no evidence. And again, why would you do something for which there is no evidence? When people are so reluctant, they're like, I don't want to get something in my body. Well, you're taking a pill that's good for parasites infections that we give to animals. So why would you think that's okay when we have a vaccine that's very safe and effective? So There's no reason to be using ivermectin. Now, maybe if a study comes out and there are a couple studies going on that shows that ivermectin's a benefit, different story. But there's no data right now that would suggest that it's useful, and there's no reason why it would be. There's, if you look at the biology of what it does, how it does, it's not an antiviral. So I don't know why it would. There's now a new antiviral coming out. Merck just announced that. It may be really important. It's probably better than remdesivir. It's not as good as the monoclonals, but it inhibits the viral replication, and it cuts hospitalizations by half. In parts of the country, the world that are not able to get vaccinated, it's a 4 or 5 day pill regimen. I think that is going to be effective. If we do anything, you should take that pill once it's approved, not ivermectin, because there's a study that shows that it works. All right. Anyway, been a pleasure being with you.
Yes, we've got 2 more final questions.
Okay.
Ava says, please explain why so many vaccinated Brits are being infected and dying from the Delta 1 and Delta 2 variants during the last 6 weeks.
So so as I said, they have stopped their public health measures. There's a lot more exposure. AstraZeneca, not the most effective vaccine. Pfizer wanes. There's not been a lot of deaths. That's incorrect. There've been more infections for sure, and that's because the vaccines aren't 100%. And they need to get to 90% of their population vaccinated, and they should be using public health measures until they do. So they're exposing, if you have 100 people and they're all vaccinated, and they're exposed to a person who's infected, you're not going to have a lot of spread. If you take 100 people who are vaccinated and you throw them against 100 people who are infected, well, every single one of those vaccinated people who is not completely protected, we know there's only 80% protection or 85%. Well, 25 of those people are going to get infected. So, you've got to get the viral burden in the community lower through public health measures, so that even the people who've been vaccinated but are still a little bit susceptible, even they are protected. If you just let everyone run around, you're gonna find every single susceptible individual, including the few that are vaccinated and susceptible. But there have not been a huge number of deaths in vaccinated people in the UK. It's up a little bit, not much.
All right, Lance, that question was actually answered earlier. He was asking about people who are reluctant to take it because they think the vaccine was quickly created. You addressed that earlier, that's just not factually correct. Rachel has a good question. Some people are eager to try non-mRNA vaccines such as Sinopharm. Are they as effective, or what would you say, if anything, about those?
So there's a bunch of other vaccines that have been developed in China and Russia that are killed vaccines or killed virus, and then there's some that are proteins. They're not as effective as the mRNA vaccines. They're much lower, more like 65% effective. So I personally would recommend an mRNA vaccine. But that's what I took. I mean, I would get an mRNA vaccine if available.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Klotman, thank you so much for your time this evening. Any final words of wisdom for the people of the Cayman Islands?
Yeah, 2 things. One is you have a chance to do something the United Kingdom isn't doing. Do it better. Do way better than the United Kingdom. Get yourselves 90%, 95% vaccinated. Keep your public health measures and make them all look bad.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll come visit y'all.
Sounds good.
So much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
All right. And Carol says deaths are actually falling in the UK. So again, folks, you gotta make sure that you're getting the accurate information, and I guess that you're interpreting it correctly as well.
Sandra,
yes.
we touched on the whole hydrochloroquine and ivermectin. We're going to continue that discussion. So for those who are watching, this conversation is still going to continue. We have another virologist as well as Dr. Tomlinson. They're going to be on Tuesday's show. You don't want to miss that show. We're going to have some open discussions there with on these topics as well, and continue the same type of topics. And again, if you want to have your questions answered, just come on and submit your questions to us, or when you're live, type it on in the chat, and we will certainly get your questions answered by the experts who are going to be presenting.
Yeah. And just earlier today, the UK made the decision to pretty much remove most destinations from its red list, including places like Afghanistan, Angola, Argentina, and so on. So apparently there's only 7 countries remaining on the red list. You know, they were doing their amber system. It looks like they have by and large just, you know, throwing that to the wayside as well. They're just saying, hey, open the borders. It's here to stay, undoubtedly, and we are going to live with it. So vaccinated travelers from Brazil, Hong Kong, India, Pakistan, South America, and Turkey will be treated the same as returning fully vaccinated UK residents, as long as they've not visited a red listed country in the past 10 days before arriving in the UK. So, you know, they continue to do that. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining in. Lance, it's good to see you. Thank you, Carol, Miss Rachel, Miss Ava. Laura, thank you so much. Nona says we need to get to 90% to safely reopen, mandate vaccines, or we'll be like the other countries that tried to open, but were unsuccessful. So people pushing for more than that. It would be amazing to get more than the 80%, and maybe the mandate that is currently in place would, you know, go a long way to help that. What do you think about that, Kev?
You know, absolutely. What I want to really say is, my family there in the Cayman Islands, we have an opportunity to be leaders of the nation. Cayman Islands already is doing an amazing job, but we absolutely are in position right now to actually be known as the island that's really kept COVID out, protected its people, its visitors, and it really depends on the 25 to 30% of people who are not yet vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a loved one who is not yet vaccinated, please sit down, talk to them, share these shows with them. They're available all the time on Facebook, on YouTube. If they want to directly speak to an expert, please contact me and I will make sure to make it happen. I will reach out to the many different experts that I know to be able to talk to you one-on-one. My passion is to just make sure that you're getting the information so you can make an informed decision. I'm not there to tell you or force you to do it. Ultimately, the decision is yours. But at the same time, I really want you to do this because I want you to be protected. I want our medical system in the Cayman Islands to be protected. And I know by living here in Florida how bad it got and how bad it still is. And there's so many other people out there that are living through it. I know that I have lost friends because they chose not to get vaccinated or they died before the vaccine happened or came about. I'm seeing this firsthand. There's so many people that are seeing it firsthand. I'm begging you to get vaccinated. And I'm going to make sure that I keep on bringing on different experts to make sure that you're getting the information that I know is not really, it wasn't available before. It's now available. No excuses. So
yes,
that's where I want to end tonight's comments.
Yes, and I want to put this up from multiple sources. The UK records 40,701 more COVID cases, highest number in a month. But again, the key thing here is that deaths, which lag behind infections, still appear to be decreasing. So this is, it marked the highest number of new corona infections since September the 6th. A further 122 people died within 28 days of testing positive as of Thursday, bringing the UK's, this was just posted 9 hours ago, bringing the UK total to 137,417 that have died. But again, this is from the Office for National Statistics, show that there have been 160,824 registered deaths in the UK where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate. So again, they've got an increase in, cases, but not the number of deaths is actually declining. So there you go. I can send you guys this link if you'd like. But again, the statistics office in the UK has said that, and that was just a few hours ago. All right, Kevin, thank you so much for, again, putting this series together. It's been really, really wonderful. I know that you're chasing up a number of different stories. You also want people who, say that they've had an adverse effect, from a
Absolutely.
vaccine
I'm
to
all about
contact you?
facts. I'm all about making sure that we're sharing information as well. I'm not trying to hide anything. So yes, I know
Yeah.
that there's a lot of rumors going around with people saying that they experience adverse reactions or they know someone that experienced an adverse reaction. So I would like those individuals to please contact me. I want to know your story. You could be completely anonymous, or you could, if you want to go public, we will make that happen. So
Hmm.
whatever your story is, I want to hear it. If you had an adverse reaction, I want it
Hmm.
from the horse's mouth. So if you know somebody that actually had it, not just hearsay. If you had an adverse reaction, contact me. If you know somebody that had it, tell them to contact me because I want to be in touch.
Yep. All right. So thank you guys so much. Nayali says great Q&A. Can't wait to see more. And folks, if you want to see more, two ways to do it. This is episode number 6. So there's 5 other shows that are really fantastic. You can go to the YouTube channel, and obviously they're listed there. You can go to Facebook and click on the tab that says videos. And we actually have a separate, we've organized it in a playlist for you, a separate section that says CMR COVID-19 spotlight series, and you can view all of the videos there as well. So what have we got coming up for next week, Kev?
So yes, next week, like I said, we have a virologist, Dr.
Mhm.
Units. He's a USF professor, and again, he is a virologist. And we have Dr. Tomlinson coming on, and we're going to have them have a conversation. Dr. Tomlinson, again, I just reconfirmed that he's going to be coming on. I let him know that he'll be on with a virologist, and so we're going to have that discussion. And then on next Thursday, we're going to have a discussion with, looking at my notes to make sure I'm getting it right. Yes, next Thursday, October the 14th, we're going to look at the evolution of COVID-19, and also Dr. Edwin Michael from USF will be doing some predictions for Cayman's impact. He's going to take some of the data that's out there and kind of do some, if we achieve this level, this is what likely will happen. If we're here, this will likely happen. He's going to kind of look at some stuff. He's been one of our great resources here in Florida where we are able to predict some stuff. And to be honest, a lot of what he said, if we at this level, this is going to happen, a lot of that actually proved to be true. Again, we don't get to, in Florida, make the decisions at my level. That's made at a different level. And some of the recommendations were not necessarily followed. And so we ended up going in a different direction. And so he's going to really share some of that information and what Cayman could expect. Then we also have coming up after that on the following Tuesday. It's not this coming Tuesday, the following one. That one is going to be about the heart. It's called The Heart and COVID-19. We have Dr. Matt Martinez as well as Dr. Harry Lever from Cleveland Clinic, Ohio, going to be coming on, and they're going to talk to especially those who might have cardiac issues and are concerned. That show will be all dedicated to that. And again, we got a lot of other things in the works. We're going to look at how the private sector healthcare system in Cayman is readying themselves. We're working through a date to confirm, and that's going to be in the very near future as well as we're going to be looking at how HSA is going to be prepared. Again, I'm waiting for that date to be confirmed. I promise I should have that any day now. So as soon as we have that confirmed, I'll definitely share that with everyone. And then we have also coming up in a future show, dating and relationships during COVID and dealing with the stresses that comes along with COVID. We have a therapist that's going to be coming on talking with us. So we have a lot of really great topics coming up. I mean, we're going to be doing this at least for the next month or so until we can't find any more topics. But we want to hear from you as well. If you have any suggested topics, and then I will start working on it. Again, we just want to keep everyone as informed as possible.
Thank you so much, Kev. Final question from Ava says, why is the European Union Council hoping to gradually phase out vaccination, implement 5 strategies? I don't know what that means. Just a quick search does not even bring up anything called the European Union Council, but you do have the European Commission, which has just secured up to 4.6 billion doses of COVID-19. So far, and negotiations were underway for even more. As of September the 15th, an article shared said that the EU was trying to prioritize global vaccination, and they were doing a drive, to try to get millions of people vaccinated. So again, I don't really know where this is coming from, but making sure that you're getting accurate information is really quite critical. And what I find a lot of times, Kevin, happens is that there are these names that sound close to legitimate names, and it's not the case at all. The European Union has stood behind and continues to stand behind vaccination. So
They
you
showed
might
it
want to
there.
revisit where that source is coming from.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that's all we've got for you. Stay tuned. Carol says fake news. That's where.
So a lot of fake
Thank you.
news out there, way too much. So really, really be careful where you're getting your information from.
Yeah, it's amazing. But these people have, you go to their legitimate websites and you're able to see exactly what is what and what's happening. So thanks, Kev. We will see you definitely on Tuesday evening, if not before. Let's replay that video, folks, that we played at the beginning of the program in case you missed it, and continue to share the CMR COVID-19 Spotlight Series with your friends and family members, because this is really all about educating people. They say knowledge is power, and when it comes to public health, and especially in the middle of a pandemic, that there's nothing more true than that statement, that knowledge is really power. So you guys have a wonderful evening. Kevin, I'll see you later.
Good night.
Going through a major surge, and this surge is something that is much bigger than what we have ever seen before. We are seeing a lot of patients with COVID who are extremely sick, and they're getting sick very quickly and very rapidly. These are young, otherwise healthy patients. To give an example, we have several patients in their 20s who never had any medical problems and have never seen a doctor, are now in the intensive care unit, on ventilator, being paralyzed, and we are still struggling to keep their oxygen levels up. So this is significant. We are seeing it every day, and we are seeing young people dying. One thing I will tell you is most patients that we are seeing in the hospital have not had their vaccine, and none, I will tell you, in the intensive care unit have had their vaccine. So we just based on that fact, it's clear, it's obvious that the vaccines are working. People who have vaccines are not getting hospitalized, and they are, even if they're getting COVID, they are getting COVID at a much milder, the form of illness is much mild, and they're able to stay out of the hospital and stay at home. Get vaccinated. That's just short 2 words. Vaccines work. Vaccines will prevent you from getting hospitalized. Do it for yourself, do it for your family, do it for your loved ones. You owe it to them. Please get vaccinated.